Welcome to another edition of Disability and You. I'm Ganesh Singh. I'll be with you for the next 28 minutes or thereabouts. Joining me on this edition is Mr. Keon Cheong, who is the Assistant Chief Education Officer with responsibility for special education needs with the Ministry of Education. Mr. Cheong has been a passionate advocate for the empowerment of persons with disabilities and the transformation of the education system to be a more inclusive space for all persons living with disabilities. On this program, we will be discussing the current strides that are being made by the ministry under the leadership of the Honorable Minister of Education, Priya Manikchan, with support from the bureaucrats within the ministry to facilitate the transformation of special education needs in Guyana congruent to the contents of the Disabilities Act. Mr. Chong will also share with us some of the constraints and future plans for special education needs in Guyana. Mr. Chong, welcome to Disability in You, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure being here.
Thanks very much. I know that you've been for quite a long time behind the scenes promoting special education needs in various capacities, and now you hold a significant portfolio where you can influence more significant policy changes, which you are doing. Tell us of some of the current measures being implemented by the ministry to enhance special education needs in Guyana.
Well, thank you again for having me. Some of the measures that we've been taking, there are quite a number, and it's
Definitely.
a multi-pronged, multifaceted kind of approach, because special education is a service, not a place. And you can search that anyway. It's a service, not a place. And so we take it from a number of places, from academic, from peripheral, and related services and that kind of thing. But some of the things that we have going on right now, we understand that accessibility is an issue.
Yes.
And as such, we are making more spaces accessible for learners with special education needs to access educational opportunities. What that translates into is that persons no longer have to perhaps travel long distances to get to school, but they can be educated at a place closer to home for them. And so we've seen a number of SEND spaces moving from about 10 to now about 22, I think we're at. And by the ending of the year, we should reach about 25 of them.
And which are some of the regions that you have these end spaces?
They are in all the regions, all administrative regions, with the exception of regions 1 and 8 at this point in time. Another one would be, in addition to SEND spaces.
But before you move on to the other one, just elaborate a bit more on SEND spaces for the understanding of the general public. So where do you create these spaces? Do you build special facilities, or do you work within existing facilities?
Okay, so that's kind of a two-way thing. So we had SEND spaces, can be a combination of SEND schools and classrooms within mainstream settings. The SEND schools would be the standalone gazetted institutions. The SEND classrooms, or SEND units as we call them, would be classrooms within schools.
Within mainstream schools?
Within mainstream schools. The trust behind that is not necessarily to build separate spaces against the backdrop of inclusivity. So we're looking to have them educated alongside their typically developing peers. And so we find children just have it, because the whole thing about a special educational need is that you just need support in particular areas. So you can go into the SEND space to get further reinforcement in a particular concept, and then you go back into your mainstream classroom.
And that is the children with disabilities, getting the support from the SEND spaces.
That is correct.
But they learn alongside their peers without disabilities.
That is correct.
In our mainstream schools.
Absolutely.
So that is the goal of all of what you guys are doing at the ministry.
Correct.
So continue with some of the other aspects. I just wanted to elaborate or discuss that a bit more for the understanding of the public.
In addition to that, what we've also saw the need for is that creating SEND spaces are one thing, but who's going to man the SEND spaces? And so that dovetails into the whole thing about having the associate degree at the Cyril College of Education. And so, like this year here, we've graduated 51 teachers with a focus on autism or intellectual disability. And they are the ones who can now go into these spaces and man them more effectively. This addresses a number of issues, from social justice to academic achievement, with us just putting these people there. So while it may look as just us graduating 51 persons, the reach, the scope, the depth of what this initiative means and marks for us as a people and a nation, I think it's underscored for the better part of it. So we have these teachers there now, and so they're going to support them. We've collaborated with the Ministry of Education Jamaica because one of the most prevalent category of disability diagnosed in Guyana to date is intellectual disability. So what we've done is that we've collaborated with the Ministry of Education Jamaica, who has a curriculum already developed for persons with intellectual disability, moderate to severe, and we've accessed training on them. We've trained the teachers to use them, so persons in our learners in our special needs settings, those particularly with intellectual disability, moderate to severe, can access instructions from a curriculum that is tailored for them, giving them that kind of support that they need. Just let me highlight here, for those who may be wanting to know when I say moderate to severe. Intellectual disability is a category of disability that where individuals show deficits in intellectual functioning and adaptive functioning. And this can be on a spectrum. They can be mild, moderate, severe, or profoundly affected. Those who are mildly affected can access educational opportunities in the mainstream setting. Those to moderate to severe are going to need more support, and as such, those are the ones who are going to be in the special needs spaces. Just to clarify that there. So those are the ones that we got there. In addition to those who've got intellectual disabilities, we've got the adaptive furniture initiative going on. So like for those persons who've got cerebral palsy, which would come under a category of intellectual disability, and have got muscular issues or posture issues or skeletal issues, they can access the adaptive furniture. And so we found for the first time some kiddos are actually going into schools because we've got this adaptive furniture initiative going for them. So we've got that there happening too. We also have Guyana, the Ministry of Education, has just, well not just, but a couple of months ago employed its first own speech therapist. So on the establishment of the Ministry of Education is a speech therapist. This again shows the breaking down of barriers and building bridges, because once we would have thought that a speech therapist belongs under the remit of the Ministry of Health, but now we have it under the Ministry of Education too. And it only serves to widen the scope and increase access and provide a wider range of support services for our learners who are desperately in need of that. Sorry, you were...
Yeah, no, I want to first back up a bit and go back to the training of the 51 teachers. I know in addition to those teachers, you would have also had the first cohort of teachers with their bachelors in special education needs graduating through the government online Academy of Learning. How are you placing these individuals, both the ones with the bachelors and the associates? Are they all in SEN spaces? And what systems are there in place to just monitor and support them while they get into the spaces? Some of them will be for the first time.
Absolutely, and thank you for reminding me of that. Yes, we do have that cohort of persons, and some of them have already started to transition into SEN spaces. And the others we're working to see based on where they live, which is the closest SEN space nearest to them, and they can go over to that space there. For those who don't have a SEN space at their location and they would have accessed this training, we're hoping that within their school setting they can support these learners there. So
because
as
they are
to
people,
maximize...
they are children in schools that are probably not even diagnosed. Yes.
Absolutely. So that's the thought behind that.
Mr. Cheong, before we move on, I just want to, I know the human resource capacity within the SEN space is something that has been lacking for decades. And as advocates, I know we've been asking for improvements in this area. And over the past 3 to 4 years, we have seen the development that we wanted. Within the cohort that graduated, you have a significant, and I mean it might sound small to many people, but you have a significant few that are persons with disabilities graduating with their associate degrees. Could you share more on that?
Yes, we did have, I think, about 3 or 4 persons from in the cohort that graduated that have disabilities of their own. In 2023, when we marked or we observed International Day for Persons with Disabilities, we did so under the theme, I think it had something to do with achieving the Sustainable Development Goals for us, for, with, and by persons with special education needs and disabilities. And the Ministry of Education embraced that, and we still do. And we understand that persons with disabilities can make meaningful contributions into society, and not just for society, but for themselves. Because one can only think about, when we think about the life expectancy for persons who don't achieve much, don't live for very long in life. I think there's literature that supports that. So if we were to give persons with disabilities the opportunity of having a job, earning a salary, paying their taxes, paying their bills, all doing it from their own self and for themselves, you can just imagine the upliftment and the sense of feeling and pride that one has in oneself by that extending their life expectancy and showing how productive they can be, and by so being role models for others.
Definitely.
And breaking down again barriers for persons who think that persons with disabilities cannot support the economic development of their community or their country at large.
As a luxury mechanic, I'm often asked, what gas should I use in my expensive vehicle? In other countries, you have regular and mid-grade gasoline known as 87, 89, and premium gasoline known as octane 93 to 95. For affordable, high-quality fuel, performance, and high mileage, visit Guy Oil today. Choose Guy Oil Super 95. Guy Oil, we are everywhere.
Prior to pausing for that break, we discussed the development or the improvement in the human resource capacity within the ministry to support the implementation of special education needs, the establishment of SEN spaces, and so on. Mr. Cheong, I want to discuss the use of assistive technology. What strides have you made in this area to facilitate both the teaching and learning process within the classroom?
Thank you for the question. As it relates to assistive technology, we have commenced using assistive technology where we can. I would admit too that we've not been as robust as we can be or should be, but disability, we should acknowledge it can be vast, because there are 13 categories of disabilities, and within each category there can be subcategories and there are different levels of effect. So identifying which set of devices would be most beneficial is what we're still working through to see which one would be the one that can cover a wider range and that kind of thing. But what I can say as of now, what we do have is that where children need devices, we've provided them, and COVID has helped us in that regard too. I mean, that may be one of the good things that came out of the COVID pandemic, in that parents would have provided their kids with laptops and tablets and these kinds of devices. So it's just a matter of the Ministry of Education helping the parents to make the connection by uploading the different apps and the different materials that are needed for them in that regard. In the classrooms, there are televisions, there are radio sets, there are laptops and computers for teachers to use to help to deliver the content.
So there is movement.
Sorry?
I said there is movement in that direction.
Absolutely. In 2022, I think the Ministry of Education would have bought a suite of apps for children to use, and so once the child has a tablet and we see that the child can benefit from these apps, the apps are uploaded onto the learner's device and they can use those apps both at home and at school. So the good thing about that is that learning transcends into the home environment with those kinds of devices.
And you would have also partnered with the Guyana Council, Organization of Persons with Disabilities, with support from UNICEF and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to help in this process of using assistive tech.
Absolutely.
Mr. Cheong, you alluded to the partnership with the Ministry of Education in Jamaica to replicate the use of their curriculum for intellectual disability. What about other development of curriculum in other areas for special education needs in Guyana? What is the status of that, if any progress being made so far?
But it's a valid question, thank you. The one with Jamaica comes as I want to say as a priority, because intellectual disability is the most prevalent disability diagnosed to date. And under intellectual disability, it can cover those on the autism spectrum, because if we talk about intellectual disabilities, we talk about cerebral palsy, we talk about autism, Fragile X syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome. All of those would come under the heading or the broad heading of intellectual disabilities. As it relates to some of the other categories of disabilities, what we have been doing is working with the teachers in training them on the areas of accommodation and modification. So for a learner who has a learning disability, a diagnosed learning disability,
And
not something that the teachers...
let's just underscore that there's a difference between intellectual and learning disabilities.
Absolutely, yes, there is a difference between intellectual and learning. So for someone with a learning disability, we've worked with the teachers in understanding how they can make accommodations and modifications. So the one topic that would last a normal class about 2 weeks to teach, then the same topic is going to last little Keon or Ganesh 4 weeks to teach, and then in that their teacher is doing the necessary modification and accommodation for that learner in that space there. We've had support for the children who are blind and visually impaired. They have itinerant teachers who go with them to their schools, the mainstream schools where they access the instructional sessions, and then when they go back to their spaces, the teachers are expected to help them to really grasp the concept and reinforcing the concepts that they would have done there. So while we would have had that one curriculum there are other measures in place for the other categories to be able to function
Excellent.
still.
So as we said earlier, it's a multi-pronged approach that
Absolutely.
is all structured and they lead into each other or they complement each other to enhance SEN in Guyana. Mr. Cheong, one other aspect that we should discuss is diagnosis and assessment. To properly diagnose children with disabilities, for decades we've been lacking in this area, and I know this is one of your passion, to ensure that there is proper assessment of children with disabilities, because it's a label that they carry through life, and it is something that can influence how they live, what opportunities they access, and so on. So what improvements have we made in diagnosis and assessment?
Improvements we have made, we have definitely made leaps and bounds in terms of assessment in Guyana. But what I want to say before we talk more about the assessment is that the assessment is the last phase of the process. The assessment phase begins with the screening, and the Ministry of Education has launched its screening packet. All the nursery year 2 teachers in regions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10 have been trained to use the screening packet, so they can be able to identify them. The screening packet comes with a complementary aspect of it, whereby, okay, I've screened the learners, what now? And so they do an intervention there. So we have a tier 1 and a tier 2 kind of thing happening there. Should
And what's the
child
intervention? So-
sorry?
I said they screen, they see, look for certain signs. What is the intervention really?
The intervention is them using evidence-based teaching practices. The intervention is them really trying to see, is little Keon not functioning because he has either a vision or hearing issue or a physiological challenge. And so we look at it from that perspective there. If it is that Keon needs glasses, well then we now have the glasses initiative being rolled out by the Ministry of Public Health. If it is that he needs some other kind of support, we can send him to the Ministry of Human Services, or Ministry of Human Services and the Ministry of Public Health to get the services that are needed, because we cannot ignore the fact that if the child is not healthy, then the child can't learn.
But is there a referral system, referral to the experts for further diagnosis and a final conclusion on the type of disability? Because I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when these teachers within the nursery and primary schools do the initial assessment, they're not qualified to give a final diagnosis or assessment, but they look for signs, create interventions, but on the severe end of it, they should refer for that final assessment. Am I correct? And what is being done there?
Absolutely. What the teachers do is screening, and the screening against developmental milestones, and against the benchmarks and standards that we have. They screen them, they do their interventions. Should this child or children not make any progress in that process, then they refer them to the Center for the comprehensive assessment and then special education eligibility. What that looks like now is that what we offer here in Guyana is an interdisciplinary approach to the assessment process. So this learner, once they get to the center, they have the opportunity of seeing a speech therapist, physiotherapist, occupational therapist, psychologist, or an educational diagnostician who gives this comprehensive assessment. That assessment and the comprehensive assessment is important for us to really be able to not misdiagnose, underdiagnose, or fail to diagnose a particular category of disability. Let's take, for instance, when we talk about intellectual disability, there should be deficits in both intellectual functioning and adaptive functioning. Intellectual function deals with the IQ, one's ability to learn and reason and that kind of thing. The adaptive functioning deals with one's ability to participate or engage in everyday activities. So we're looking at gripping and mobility and that kind of thing, and that comes from a different discipline. So having these two disciplines, having a conversation is important. Similarly, if we were to look at children on the spectrum, now we look at the IQ level or the cognitive level, we're looking at adaptive level, and some people may even look at it at speech level. And there's a speech therapist. So now you have three different disciplines coming together there to really weigh in to see what's happening there. I know autism is one of the most referred cases that we have in Guyana. A lot of kiddos are being referred for suspected autism. So we try to use that approach there to help us to understand whether it's indeed autism or not autism. At the Diagnostic Center for the Ministry of Education, we're not inclined to giving a child an official diagnosis before the age of 6. Reason being is that we need to take into consideration that these instruments are not normed in Guyana, 1. 2, what is the culture of the home or the family? I mean, some of the behaviors are enabled, and so we need to first address that. 3, the behaviors. We've had a number of kiddos coming because of behavioral issues, and parents or persons who are referring them seem to think that because the kiddo has a behavioral issue, in addition to the kid not looking at me when I'm speaking to him or her, then the kid should be or is on the spectrum. The literature has shown that we've moved away from the eye contact because some cultures, you don't need to look at somebody to know that they're speaking to you or not speaking to you. So we've set that one aside there. On the issue of behavior, we've got to know how much of it has been enabled. And we can go into a whole discourse now about kinds of positive and negative reinforcement and how that...
And that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. But I say all of that to say that it's the interdisciplinary approach is functional for this kind of space.
And all of that comes under the ambit of the regional disability diagnostic, special education needs diagnostic and treatment center.
Yes.
Mr. Cheong, before we move on to the two other areas, because time is running on us so quickly, I just want you to say a few words on persons professing out there to be experts and diagnosing children with disabilities. And again, you mentioned earlier that it's a label for life in most cases. Could you give us a few words on this?
My only thing would be to the parents, and I know parents are anxious to get a diagnosis, anxious to know what's happening with their kids. It is important that you understand that the assessment process is a process. It isn't prescriptive, it's more descriptive. By descriptive, I mean it's a timely process. As a licensed educational diagnostician, if I were to do a cognitive assessment on an individual, for me to compile the report for this one individual, it would take about 4 to 6 weeks for one individual, because of how comprehensive the assessment process is. And parents just are of the view that I can walk into a place and get an assessment done by the time I'm ready to leave. I say all of that to say that when you're going to access these kinds of assessment, find out more about what it is. Are these persons licensed to do what it is? Are they in keeping...
Do more research.
More research, or in keeping with best practices, and really get what are the instruments. And if you're going to approach someone who's going to give your learner, your kid, some kind of services, okay, what are the end goals? There must be goals. If they're going to do any kind of intervention, where are we starting, where are we ending, and what is the duration, so you as the parent can measure, okay, you said it would take 8 weeks for my kid to be able to count from 1 to 5. We're at week 15 and nothing has happened. What is happening? And you hold that person accountable for that kind of thing. They need to be able to say something to you about it.
Because people are just using different qualifications, and because they have those qualifications, parents are not even researching what the qualification is about. Are they qualified to diagnose? But again, we can talk so much on this. Mr. Cheong, what are some of the constraints that you and your team are encountering in your quest to improve special education needs in Guyana?
Constraints. I don't know how to say we are experiencing constraints. We are definitely learning lessons, and this makes it a fantastic thing, because it's always you're always learning something new and something different. Some of the lessons we're learning, one is that we need to do more parent sensitization and parent awareness to
And
help
support.
parents to understand that. We need to get more teachers buy-in, because we need to know that not because a child is showing some signs of challenges in one area that you just completely write the child off. Data collection is a very big important part of it. Because let's say we're looking at the child not being able to read and you're doing the intervention, you must be able to track the progress of this learner across a couple of weeks before you can see that. And I think literature says that for you to see any changes on any intervention, it should take about 3 weeks of implementation. And so as we implement the intervention, we need to look at consistency, we need to look at duration, the frequency, and all of these things in the intervention to really be able to ascertain the effectiveness of the intervention. So those are some of the lessons that we've learned.
And what about support for parents who, are finding it hard to cope psychologically with a child having a disability, but at the same time, having the knowledge on how to best support their children? Do you think that's an area that needs some work?
Absolutely. I know one of the things that we do at the diagnostic center is that there's a post-counseling session. In that I mean that before a parent is given to the diagnosis of their child, they engage in a conversation. Is there something that you're expecting? How do you find yourself coping with these results? Is there something support you think you need after you've had these results here? And so we have that. On a wider scale, no, it isn't being done like that, and it's something that we are looking at doing. But we offer it on a one-on-one basis because we understand that it can be a lot for a parent getting a diagnosis of a child with a disability.
Definitely.
It changes everything. I mean, some of parents are suspecting that, hey, something is wrong with my kid, but when you have it in black and white, it's something completely different. So we try to provide that support there for those learners.
Excellent. Mr. Cheong, we have 30 seconds for you to tell me some of the plans of the Ministry of Education for special education needs.
30 seconds. We most definitely will continue to establish sense spaces where sense spaces are needed. We most definitely.
And that's informed by numbers.
Sorry?
And that's informed by numbers.
Informed by numbers, absolutely. We most definitely are looking at strengthening the capacity of the diagnostic team so that we can reach more people and cover more area locations in that. We are looking at definitely working with the teachers in building their pedagogical skills, and that's lessons that we continue to learn
and also in targeted areas in certain specialties.
Absolutely, and helping the different the difference between the coastline and the hinterland regions and how it is that they interact with their learners and supporting them in that regard.
Excellent.
So we continue to build on those and strengthen those areas there.
Mr. Cheong, we could have had this discussion continue for the next hour because of the volume of information you have on SEN, and I can tell from the way you speak the passion that you have for this field to have the lives of children with disabilities transformed so that they can live independent lives as adults. I want to thank you very much for the work that you're doing, but also for coming on the program and sharing with the public. And for those within our society and those that are viewing, listening this program, if you have a child and there are certain signs, don't wait. Get a proper diagnosis done. Mr. Cheong, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That's Disability in You for this edition. I'm Ganesh, and I'll be back with you next time. In the meantime, do remember, disability rights are human rights.